and slides out, we're on chapter 13. Those live on my website, so even if you've lost all your paper copies, they are living there. Just to remind you guys, AP test is on May 15th, so 3.5 weeks away, a little bit less than a month. A couple people have done their practice DBQ online, and a few people have even asked me some questions on it. So Monday is the day that we're going to do the little DBQ walkthrough, and that'll be at 12:30 during the office hours one. So Monday it's going to be a DBQ walkthrough, and I'll just provide you guys all a copy with one, and we'll talk about what we like and what we don't like about it. So if you haven't had the chance to do it yet, it'd be cool if you could get it done by Monday, and then we'll work with it. Any other questions or important concerns before I jump into this, guys, for chapter 13?
So like if we haven't done it yet, but we are going to do it later today or by Monday, that's fine.
Yeah, it's totally fine, Aaron. And remember, the grades are pass-fail now, so it's just practice. Most of you guys that log on here, you log on because you really want to get a 5 on the AP test. And so I recommend you practice. And, it doesn't matter when you can get it in. Anytime you can do it is worth the practice. So, yeah. That's my advice on that one. I just want to talk about strategies and what makes a good DBQ and what doesn't. And it's easier to do that when we're all looking at the same one and like, oh, this thesis is great because it has this and this, or this thesis sucks because it doesn't have that or whatever. So that's what we'll do. I'll make it all anonymous. So, all right, guys, here is chapter 13. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen, someone. Oh, I can't see anyone's face. Someone. Can you see my screen verbally? Thanks, Aaron. Cool. All right, guys. So just looking at the vocabulary, a lot of it should look familiar, specifically manifest destiny. Hopefully dudes like James K. Polk are familiar. Not only the Mexican-American War, but the Compromise of 1850 should be familiar too. You start to see how big of a chapter this is, guys. This is Bleeding Kansas and Kansas, Nebraska. It's the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I mean, it's a huge, huge chapter. It's the late part of abolition, essentially. We already did early abolition with William Lloyd Garrison and, Nat Turner's slave revolt. Now this is kind of the later part of abolition, which we really know is the sectional crisis. So this is all about westward expansion and whether or not slavery will be expanded out with Americans as they create new states out west. And so, yeah, that's kind of the context of this. You guys know what Manifest Destiny is. It's made popular by that very famous painting. I think I got it on like the second slide right here. We have that angelic feature moving west, and she's bringing things like education, technology, electricity, railroads, and we see not only the bison, but the Indians and the other wild game that are fleeing. And the artist in this image actually plays with light colors and dark colors, the darkness being drowned out by the light of civilizations. And so just be aware of what the definition is. Americans feel that, not only is it kind of inevitable that we're going to move west, it's a good thing. God has put all this stuff here for our use. If God wasn't okay with this, why is he giving all these Indians smallpox? Why is he depopulating the West of Indians and making it available for us if he doesn't want it? So not only are they saying it's inevitable, they're saying it's a good thing, and it's essentially our destiny, and it's inspired by God that we create a continent from sea to shining sea, and we utilize the resources for Americans. That's basically what that slide says right there. That term is first coined in 1845. Our manifest destiny is to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. This is very much in line with the Jeffersonian idea of a nation of yeoman farmers, of small family farms. So cool. This is just a map of land acquisitions, folks. Please be aware that we're going to double the size of the nation this chapter. Not only did we started to take Texas last chapter, we're going to actually annex it today with James K. Polk as president. And then by the end of the chapter, folks, we'll have taken the Oregon Territory and the entire Mexican cession. So you can see, based on this map, that the nation's about to double. And the implications for that and the slavery issue are huge. It's no accident that the Civil War occurs, right on the heels of all of this land acquisition and the struggle for whether or not slavery will be brought west. Another very famous image. I actually don't know the artist of this one, guys, but this is showing people on the Oregon Trail looking down into the Willamette Valley. That's like modern day Portland, Oregon. And again, the artist uses darkness and light in kind of the same way. Yeah, you could very easily see one of those images on a DBQ and have that be the source. They would expect you to talk all about manifest destiny just seeing one of those images. I don't need to really say much about Oregon, guys. You need to know why people want to move there. They want to move there because your average American simply wants to acquire a homestead or a piece of land that they can leave to their children for future generations. That opportunity really doesn't exist in a lot of Europe. I'm not an expert on European history, but poor people acquiring land is just a lot harder out in Europe. In America, it can tend to be free often. And so that is the incentive. New opportunity, starting over. This whole myth of new opportunities in the West, guys, exist. Whether you're talking about, I'm going to drop out and move to Hollywood and become an actor, and it's the 21st century, or it's the 1840s, and you just want to get some fertile land out in Oregon. I can start over. Be familiar with that. That's the incentive, obviously, for moving out there, folks. That land is not part of the United States at the time. It's contested between Great Britain and the United States. But James K. Polk is going to come in, guys, and you got to know that Polk is our expansionist president. He, runs on a platform of annexing Texas, which our government has neglected to do for 10 years. And he runs on that platform, 54-40 or fight. I think I got that slogan down there. The dude's trying to extend our borders all the way up into modern day British Columbia. So not only does he demand that the British relinquish their claim to all of Oregon, he actually is thinking we're going to have, that's like 150 miles of coastline up into British Columbia. That's like almost near Glacier Bay National Park, way, way deep into Canadian territory today. We obviously don't set the boundary at 54-40, but I'm just trying to help you guys understand the expansionist mentality of the Democratic Party at this time. Yeah, so that's essentially it. He's very similar to Andrew Jackson in that way. The same type of people who voted for Andrew Jackson would have voted for James K. Polk. He is definitely made from the mold of the Jacksonian democracy. Cool. So we don't really need to say anything more about Oregon, guys. Be aware that we are going to take it by 1846. Great Britain is going to cede their claim to it. We essentially threaten them with war, and that's how we get it. And it's not just people moving into Oregon, guys. A lot of those overland settlers are flooding into the Sacramento Valley of California, which also is not part of the United States yet. It's Mexican territory. Men like John Sutter, who will be prominent in the California Gold Rush, again, he's settling in Mexico at the time. Cool. Talk about that. I don't really need to say much about the Californios, guys, but you live in California. You drive on freeways in California, and you pass Spanish place names every single day of your life. You can't drive down through our town, Nevada, without seeing Spanish place names. So you guys just have to simply understand the legacy of the Californios, not only out west, but in our own town, folks. Our town, Novato, was an old land grant given to essentially a Mexican aristocrat, a Californio. So you don't have to be experts on them, but you have to know who's out in California before huge numbers of Americans and other people from around the world are going to arrive in the gold rush. There's not a lot of Californios. There's a couple tens of thousands of them, and they're essentially into ranching. This way of life is what's heavily romanticized in California history. Think about the architecture, mission-style architecture. You'll go to shopping centers, today in California, and it'll be made to look like an old, Adobe-style ranch house from a Californio's, land grant. So just be aware of who's in California at the time. Understand the influence not only on architecture, but on literature and just on kind of the nostalgia of what California is all about. That doesn't make sense to a lot of people who don't live in California, but you guys, I don't know if it sounds dumb to you, but most of you guys, I think, get what I'm talking about. The influence and the romanticism of the Californios. All of their land is essentially going to be taken from them once gold is discovered, oftentimes through illegal squatting. Oftentimes they'll have to prove to the new U.S. government that that's really their land. You don't have to understand that much about them, but just know who's there. This is a very famous one. He's the former governor of California, Mariano Vallejo. You guys might recognize the last name, named after a city. Or I'm sorry, the city is named after him. We've anglicized the name. We call it Vallejo. But Vallejo, Rancho Sonoma. He owned 250,000 acres, basically from Vallejo to modern-day Sonoma, all throughout wine country and everything. So know who they are. I'm just going to go for about 5 or 10 more minutes today, guys. You don't need to do anything with those maps. I think I'm going to do, I will do the lead up to the Mexican-American War, and then I'll stop right there. Okay. So, folks, remember, we have had an independent nation in North America since the 1830s, besides the United States. We've actually had two. We've had Mexico, we've had Texas, and we've had the United States. There's been literally 3 sovereign countries in North America in the 1830s. But by the time James K. Polk is president, there's only going to be 2. Texas is no longer a sovereign country. They are now part of the United States. And Mexico's got some problems with that, guys. We haven't even really determined where the borders are between Mexico and Texas. And this is what prompts the Mexican-American War. Mexicans think that the border is the Nueces River. The Mexican government believes that northern boundary is it. But James K. Polk and the Americans think, no, it's the Rio Grande. You guys know what the modern shape of Texas is. You recognize the southern border. You guys could recognize that shape in your sleep. That's the Rio Grande. And that border, folks, that little area where you see my mouse hovering in between, that area in dispute is what causes the Mexican-American War. Mexico claims it's theirs. The United States claims it's theirs. But this is where the conflict starts, guys. The United States purposely tries to incite conflict with Mexico by putting troops into this. There's a skirmish that occurs in Mexican territory, and then the United States essentially has the right to say that American troops have been fired on, and that is the pretense for going to war. You don't have to be experts on this, folks, but really historians pretty unilaterally agree that the United States went into Mexican territory and provoked a skirmish in order to declare war. Many southern slave owners really would want to see the southwestern United States acquired for the purpose of expanding slavery. We talked about that yesterday, guys. Slavery is really boxed in with that 3630 parallel from the Missouri Compromise. And so again, it makes perfect sense if you're a slave owner like James K. Polk, that you would want to provoke war with Mexico and expand further west into that territory to expand the institution of slavery. As far as knowing anything about the battles or major events of that, hi, Ivy. That's my niece. Ivy, how old are you? 5. You don't really have to know anything about the war itself, guys. There's no battles you have to know or anything like that. But you just have to be aware that a lot of people were critical of this. There's a huge number of American literary voices. Emerson and Thoreau, the transcendentalists, they're all outspoken against the war. I'm totally blanking on a couple other prominent authors that speak out against the war, but a lot of people are suspicious of it. Abraham Lincoln's one of them. He actually gets up on the floor of the United States Congress and demands that they show the spot on American soil where American blood was shed. And he's being sarcastic, guys, because they can't show it. It didn't actually happen on American soil. So therefore, you can't show the spot. He was trying to be kind of ironic and sarcastic. Many historians and even many people at the time believe that this is a war to expand slavery, essentially. But the American public is in general supportive of it. Even though there's people who oppose it, this is not an unpopular war. Many Americans volunteer, and there's a pretty big wave of patriotism that'll overtake the country at this time. So, again, guys, you're not going to have to really understand details about the Mexican-American War. I've never once seen an essay about the causes of the war. It's all about the consequences, and it's all about the land we acquire. You will never have to, like, guys, I've never actually even seen them have to talk about the border dispute. What was it, the Nueces River? Was it the Rio Grande? I don't even really think you got to know that. What you got to know is after we take that land from Mexico, what's going to happen to it? Will it be slave or free, essentially, is the big debate right there. That's where I want to leave it. That's where I want to leave it today. Extra short. We talked really quickly, guys, about Manifest Destiny. We talked a little bit about Oregon and James K. Polk, you know, his slogan 5440, his expansionism. Talked a little bit about the Californios. And we talked about the Mexican-American War very, very briefly. Remember, these are reviews. These aren't like full-on lectures. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any point, guys. Just speak up, just yell, and I'll hear you. We're going to do the rest of this chapter tomorrow morning. The only thing that I didn't mention, guys, is the very first slide. And just like it's important you understand who's in California before the gold rush, it's important you understand kind of what the Great Plains look like before Americans move west in their covered wagons and then eventually the railroads. The Great Plains, and just like California is not empty, guys, the Great Plains are not empty. Look at this map I've depicted for you here, guys. There's something like 25 or 30 tribes, and this map is not complete. There are even more tribes than that located on the Great Plains. So I'm just trying to help you understand, guys, that this idea of manifest destiny is going to have consequences. And the consequences of that, guys, are going to be both positive for white Americans and very, very negative for indigenous people living on the plains here. If you were a white American, manifest destiny might be, you know, the first opportunity your family's ever had to rise in social structure. If you are a white American moving west, that's really a true sense of freedom. But you got to understand what the other side of that coin is. And they're moving on to land that's been heavily occupied by different native tribes. Ultimately, folks, you are aware that this is going to result in the ultimate extermination of these tribes. Some of them will be hunted down by the military. We'll talk more about that later with like Sitting Bull and his resistance. And but many of them will simply be eliminated through assimilation and being placed on reservations. You could talk for weeks about this topic, folks, but I'm trying to help you understand that if you're writing an essay on westward expansion, you absolutely need a paragraph on the native tribes that are in the Great Plains. If you're talking about manifest destiny, don't just tell me that it's like, oh, it's, this idea that God wants us to spread west and it's all good. You're right, but you've got to also talk about the flip side of that if you want to get the highest score possible on that essay. Causation. The idea of manifest destiny will lead to what? Tell me multiple things. It's going to lead to great things for white Americans. It's going to lead to really negative things for Native Americans. Show causation. That's the most important thing we do. When we look at the DBQ on Monday, folks, the practice one, we're just going to basically be trying to identify, did they show causation a lot? We'll be looking for other things than that, but that's one of the most important things to look for. Cool. These two pictures, man, you guys should be able to say a lot about them. Just looking at these pictures of the buffalo and the tribes, looking at the picture of manifest destiny, that's the making of a good DBQ right there. Cool. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Does anyone have any questions for me or concerns or any questions on this topic so far? No. Whose face can I see? I can't see M's face, but her camera's on. See Josh? No. Can't see anyone. Can't see anyone's face. All right, folks. Well, I appreciate you tuning in. No questions? I'll go ahead and stop recording. Tomorrow, I want to do 9 o'clock.